Hey, what's up, you guys? The Curious Owl here, and today I'm going to be tier ranking every series I have completed. So this list is not exactly comprehensive because some of these are series that technically haven't been finished as of yet. Like there's, I think, The Hunger Games in here, which is getting a prequel that just got released here a couple days ago, so I haven't really read that. There's a couple other series that I think that I haven't completely finished because I've got like short story collections of some kind to read from, but essentially these are the series that at least the main parts of I have completed, and there is one series that I'm going to finish my reread series for, which is the Morganville Vampires. So that technically is a series though I did complete for the very first time when I was in high school, so that does count. I'm just doing a reread of it. And then I have another series on here, Thirst, that I'm going to be doing a reread series of here soon, but I also did complete that for the first time in high school, so that does still count. But without further ado, let me get into the list of this. Now, there's not very many because I've actually not completed a lot of series. It's been kind of hit or miss whenever I've completed a series or not, because I sometimes forget about them, or I haven't just gotten past like the first couple books or something like that. So it's a pretty small list, but let's see how we do. So this is basically how I have the whole thing set up, where at the very top is best of the best, series that either I still remember very fondly of, or I feel like is just so good in terms of it being like a series that really shaped the way that I read, or that I just feel like in general is like such a good series for one reason or another. Then I have Really Good, which is a series I may have really liked at the time, or may have changed my mind on as time's gone on, or is a series I may have recently reread that I kind of didn't like as much as I had first read it, but was still absolutely enjoyable. And then I have Meh, which is kind of a series that, I liked maybe at first, but I didn't really seem to like very much going into it further, or something may have happened where my mind had changed drastically over time. Then we have Ugh, which is like a series that I probably didn't like starting off and just continued to dislike over time. And then Nope was a series that I somehow ended up actually completing, despite the fact that it was just complete trash the entire time. I'm thinking that most of these are going to kind of play into the top 3, but I think that there's at least one that might go into Ugh, but we'll see. So the first one is Beautiful Creatures by Kami Garcia and Margaret Stohl. You guys know that that's one of my most favorite series of all time. However, going through the reread series that I did over the course of I think 2018 to 2019, I actually found that there was quite a few things I didn't care so much about when it came to some of the later books, and then some of the novellas and short stories that had come from it. So I think that in general, it's a really good series. I still love it with my whole heart and soul, but I do realize that that's a series that kind of just, in some places, didn't work as well as when I had probably first read the main series when I had read it in high school. The next one is the Crank series by Ellen Hopkins. Now, this one I also read in high school, and this was actually my very first experience with Ellen Hopkins, and I kind of got into dark contemporaries with this series, and I really enjoyed it a lot. I think I would consider this to be best of the best, because this was, I think, where I really got into understanding dark contemporaries, and I truly felt like Ellen Hopkins was amazing. I loved the series, and I loved exactly what the whole thing had gone into with the explanation of how the main character gets addicted to methamphetamines, and crystal meth in general, and how she kind of just traversed her life. I just felt like I was enraptured the whole time, and I still have very fond memories of the series despite how dark it was. Okay, the next one is the Divergent series by Veronica Roth. Now, despite what a lot of people have opinions on when it comes to Allegiant, I actually really liked Allegiant. I thought it was a really good ending to the series, but I think that in general, this is kind of a series that's really good because it's not perfect by any means, but I think that it's because it was a product of its time, and so a lot of the writing of it is definitely not going to hit as hard as it would back in 2011, 2012 when it had first come out. So the next series is Dorothy Must Die by Danielle Page. Now, I had really high hopes into this series going through it. I really felt that it was going to be something amazing. And then The Wicked Will Rise was also really good. I think that that was my favorite book in the entire series, but then the series just kind of went downhill from there. Books 3 and 4 were not really as good as I had wanted them to be, and I actually thought that books 3 and 4 could have been combined into one book, because that would have seemed to have made more sense considering the kind of way that the plot had developed over the course of those 2 books. Now, this is a series where I haven't completely finished it because I am actually going to be reading the 3 collections of short stories that are involved with the series, but the main series itself was completed, so I consider that to be kind of to count within this whole list. I think in general, this is going to be one of my meh ones because I think in general, the story was really nice, but I felt that the overall plot and how things developed was not where I wanted it to be, especially towards the end, and I was greatly disappointed by that when I got to the very last 2 books, but it had started off on kind of a greater note within the first and the second book. Okay, so now we have Flame in the Mist by Renee Ahdieh. This is kind of one of those series. Now, I rated both of the books 3 stars, don't get me wrong, but I continuously look back on this and feel like this was such a missed opportunity because for one, the series was written out to be and marketed to be kind of a Mulan retelling. The whole story centers around the fact that there's like this big political war going on and Mariko, the main character, is like in the middle of it because she was supposed to go and marry the emperor's son at some point. And when her caravan is attacked, she finds out that she was basically the target of an assassination and she doesn't know who it was by, who like did anything with it. So it has so much potential to be a really great story, and then it involved a kind of other love interest in the story that I thought was really, really fun and I thought was going to go so many places within Smoke in the Sun, the second book, but it was such a letdown. Like everything was set up and it just fell apart so very easily within the first book. I found that I just continuously shook my head throughout the entirety of it because I felt like Renee Ahdieh didn't give me what I wanted, because the whole time that this story was being promoted was that it was supposed to be a Mulan retelling, and that's what I wanted. I wanted a Mulan retelling, especially with the fact that we were involving things like yokai, which are like Japanese spirits of some kind. Like I think they're Japanese animal spirits or something like that, and I'm so excited for all of that. And it just really made me like hate it, to be honest. I wouldn't say it's a nope because there are some elements in it that are really good. Like I think that the overall base of it was good, but just the development of the story and everything regarding the characters and their interactions just didn't work for me, and I feel like the further I get away from this duology, the more I dislike it. Okay, so then I have the Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin. Now this is not a complete series because there are supposed to be 2 other books coming out hopefully in the next couple of years. The 6th book got pushed back because it was supposed to come out this spring and we have heard nothing about it. So in terms of where I would place this, I would say this is a really good series because I think that it has its issues. It doesn't necessarily treat women the best in terms of this world. I think that Martin kind of writes a lot of characters that are kind of throwaway characters in terms of the women, and I feel like though with Fire and Blood, with the prequel story of the Targaryens, like that showcased a lot more of the treatment of women, of how like he's gotten better of them. Like he doesn't treat them like throwaway characters. A lot of the women in that book specifically were used for a specific purpose, and it wasn't like demeaning or anything. Like they just actually had real personalities, despite that it was kind of a more historical text kind of story. I think that in the main series though, he definitely does treat the women pretty poorly, and obviously there's a lot of animal abuse going on in the story, which I'm not really a fan of, but I think in general, in terms of world and plot, the story itself is really, really good, and the rest of it's kind of just nitpicky things that I don't personally like. I can't fault that Martin has really built a world that is so expansive that he's even created a prequel series for it, and he has so many short stories within the world itself that have been published in various works and have even created their own collections of sorts. Okay, next is Harry Potter, which this has got to be best of the best. Now, I know this is such a hard thing for a lot of people to talk about because J.K. Rowling has really gotten herself into a hole with a lot of her transphobic comments that she's made, especially on Twitter, and I do not support that in any way. I absolutely hate the fact that she is making herself out to be this person because she created a world for a lot of people that is based in nostalgia. Now, this is not really a nostalgia thing for me when it comes to picking this as best of the best. Putting aside the lack of diversity that is within this book, which is very apparent. It is very apparent that this is a book that not only lacks diversity, but even pokes fun at a lot of people. Like, I think there was a whole comment about how the goblins in Gringotts are kind of reminiscent of Jewish people, and how that was kind of taken really weirdly. Despite that stuff, I think the overall plot and the world that J.K. Rowling was able to build with these books is still something that I think is so easy to replicate and has been replicated over time. And the reason is because people enjoyed it. People wanted to create worlds similar to this because it was really thought out. A lot of her creatures that she uses in the series are either based in actual cultures that have creatures similar to this, or they're pulled from fairy tales that, you know, we have all grown and known about. So I think in terms of looking at it from that perspective, it's still holds up as a really good series and is such a great way for younger readers to get involved in fantasy, but it's still so enjoyable for us older readers to continue to read and reread over and over again, because it does bring back that nostalgia of reading it for the first time. But I'm never going to excuse the fact that J.K. Rowling herself is an awful person, and some of the things that she's written in this book are not, you know, commendable. I think that there's definitely some issues with it, but I still think in terms of the amount of impact it's had on the world, that it is still one of the best books that you will see in terms of looking at middle grade fantasy, I think, in general. So then next we have the If I Stay duology by Gail Forman. Now, I actually really liked this series, but I think the more I think about it, it's kind of meh in terms of looking at it further and further as I've gone away from it. So I read If I Stay for the first time, I think my freshman year of college. It was one of the very first reviews I did, and I really liked it at the time. It was very hard-hitting. It was very much a story that I cried at, which I don't typically do a lot, but it was one of those stories where I really cried at because it was something that I think hit me very personally for some reason. And then I read Where She Went last year during the Contemporary-a-thon, I believe, and I also really liked that because it played more with her boyfriend's perspective. I can't even remember his name off the top of my head now, but that's kind of my point, is the further and further I get away from this series, the less and less I remember of it. And I think that's because it's just not as memorable of a story. At least the second book isn't really that memorable, because all I can remember of it was like it's all after they've grown up and he sees her again for the first time in like a few years, and it's like them rekindling their romance or something like that, but I can't remember like the real nitty-gritty details of it. And I don't even really remember the nitty-gritty details of the first book, so I feel like this is one of those stories where the further I've gotten away from it, the more I forgot and the less love I feel for this book. So next we have the Impulse duology by Ellen Hopkins. In terms of how I thought about this book the two books when I first read them, I thought they were very impactful. Now, like, this is another series that deals with some very, very hard topics. Ellen Hopkins is never one to shy away from those things. This one in particular deals with suicide attempts. It deals with anorexia, I think, in the second book, Perfect. There's a lot of things that it deals with in terms of just kind of the ideas of perfection, and in the second book, Perfect, but then in Impulse, it deals with 3 kids who basically are all in this mental rehabilitation center, and they all are there for a specific reason, and it's very hard for them to traverse that. And the end of the Impulse was very, very hard to swallow. It was very triggering for a lot of people, especially me, because I've actually had friends who have attempted suicide, and so it was very hard for me to go with that. I think that though this was one of those books that kind of helped me to desensitize myself to those kinds of things when it comes to deaths of characters, but at the time it was still something really hard for me to swallow. So I think the more I've gotten away from this, though, I would say it's still a really good series. I think that it's just something that you have to be aware of. Whenever you go into anything with Ellen Hopkins, you have to be aware that there's going to be some very triggering things because she doesn't shy away from anything. So next we have the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm including in this The Hobbit because that is the prequel to that story. This is one of the best of the best. This is obviously one of the most impactful stories when it comes to fantasy. Like, if you have not read the Lord of the Rings series and you love fantasy, what are you doing with your life? Because this is pretty much where I think the entirety of the fantasy genre had really picked up. Now, it's not the first book in fantasy by any means, but I think that it's one of those stories that has impacted the way that fantasy has been written so much. Like, it has everything, like adventure, magic, it has intrigue, it has monsters. Like, this was a series that I remember reading in high school, and I was like blown away by it because I didn't realize how much of an impact this would have had on so many of the fantasy books that we see today until I read that series. And so I think that it's just one of those, it's like chef's kiss, amazing. And the movies are just absolutely amazing. So then we have Never Never by James Patterson, which is a duology. And yeah, this is actually one of my nopes because I liked the first book. I liked it a lot. I thought it was really, really good. And then I listened to 50/50, which is the second book in the Harriet Blue duology. I think it's only supposed to be a duology, but that book I was so pissed by. I was so disappointed by it, and it honestly kind of ruined Never Never for me. I hated the way that 50/50 had ended because it made no sense considering what had been led up to at that point. I couldn't handle it. I felt like it just was over too quick, and I felt like it was way dumber than it should have been. I hated it. I hated it so much. So then we have The Fifth Wave by Rick Yancey. This is, I think, one of those stories because I liked the first one. I liked the second one more. I gave the third one a 3-star, but it just in general, the more I've kind of moved away from this one too, I just feel like I don't like it. I don't like Cassie is my big thing. Cassie just doesn't make sense to me because, especially in the first book, which was one of my biggest gripes with the first book, she like meets the alien and they have this thing happen all of a sudden. Like, I don't get it. And then the entirety of the second and third books are just her trying to like work between the guy that she's been with, which is this alien, and then the guy that she's had a crush on since she was a little kid. Like, I felt like all of it was just a big drama fest, and I couldn't handle it because it was annoying. Like, she cared more about her relationships with those two people than trying to save her little brother and the world, and I don't know, I just couldn't handle it. I feel like the series in general just doesn't age well, in my opinion, and I feel like it's just a very poorly written story. I don't like it. So then we have The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. Now, I know that the prequel just got released for this, so I haven't read it as of yet. I don't know if I really want to be honest. I'm kind of up in the air with it because I've been hearing a lot of people say it's not good, it's not that great. And then I have friends who aren't on BookTube or a Book Twitter that are loving it because I think that they had watched the movies first and then decided to read the books, and so they thought that the movies were just as good. I personally hated Mockingjay. Mockingjay was absolutely awful. I don't know why people like that book at all. Catching Fire is probably my most favorite out of the books. I think I gave that one a 5-star because I loved it, and I think that that's the best adaptation of it. That second movie is actually like one of the best adaptations I've seen because it followed the book almost perfectly. I think in general, the series is pretty meh for me because, like I said, I liked the first book, loved the second, hated the third, not really sure if I really want to read the prequel because I don't know if it's going to showcase Snow as kind of a redeemable character because I don't think he is. I absolutely hate Snow. It's okay. It's not my favorite series, and I don't think I would ever want to reread it, but I am glad that I gave it a chance. I am glad that I actually did read the series. I don't know if I really want to read the prequel because I don't like Snow. I don't want to like Snow. I don't want this book to make me like Snow. Okay, so then we have the Red Pyramid series by Rick Riordan. Now, I would say this is a really good series. Now, this is the first Rick Riordan series I ever completed, and I read this, I think, in middle school or high school. I can't remember. I want to say it might have been late middle school, early high school, and I loved it. I loved it so much when I first read it, but I think that this is another middle grade series where, like, the further I got away from it, the more, like, I just forgot about it. So I do want to actually possibly reread this series because I have the second and third books, but I don't have the first one. And I want to get it because I do want to reread it. I want to see what I thought of it because I remember liking it a lot because it dealt with some things that I hadn't expected it to. Like, the two main characters of the story are claustrophobic, and I have never seen that before in any books. I'm not claustrophobic myself, but my sister kind of is. She has a little bit of claustrophobia when it comes to being in spaces where she just can't move out of. And she, like, right now she works as an essential grocery store worker, and so having to wear her mask is very hard for her because she doesn't like feeling her own breath coming back at her. It makes her feel very warm and kind of makes her feel like the walls are closing in sometimes. But to see characters that had that were interesting because it reminded me a lot of when I watched the first Percy Jackson movie that obviously Rick Riordan hates, that how Percy had dyslexia, and I had never seen a character that had dyslexia before and have it be portrayed in that way. And so seeing the Kane siblings actually have claustrophobia and seeing kind of how they deal with it in that book, in that series, was interesting. Plus, I'm a huge ancient Egyptian like nerd, so this was a series I was all for. I loved it, but I think it was one of those series where I forget a lot of things about it, and I think it's time for me to do a reread here fairly soon because it's a series that I remember really enjoying and want to see if I still like it today. Okay, so next we have The Morganville Vampires by Rachel Kane. This, I think in general, is really good too, because the more that I've reread this series, now that I'm on the last book of it, as I reread the series, I've realized the first like phase of the series, which is like I think books 1 through 8, they're pretty good. The first couple books are not really that good because it's very juvenile writing. Then you go further in the series and get into like phase 2, which is books 9 through 13. And things really pick up, the plot really picks up, it's more complex, the characters become more complex, we start seeing more perspectives as opposed to just Claire's, and it just in general is a really good series. Like, it builds so well. And when I just read Fall of Night here last month, I think that that's my favorite book in the series as of now because it showcased so much how Rachel had grown over the entirety of writing the series. And now that I'm going to read Daylighters here soon, the very last book in the series, I have high hopes because when I first read that book at the end of my senior year of high school, it was like the perfect ending to this series that I could have asked for. So I think in general, it's a really good series, but it definitely has its fault points because especially the very beginning of the series, it's juvenile writing. It's not something I think I would have liked if I had started it for the very first time as an adult. So now we have The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Now I know that the last book, The Burning God, just I think got delayed here, so it's not complete as of yet, but I have read the first 2 books in the series, and I think this is best of the best. This is one of my most favorite fantasy series, I think, of all time because it's so complex, and I think that it's one of those series where like it's another series kind of like the Game of Thrones where you have to be prepared for it to get nasty because it's going to. There is so much involved in this series, and especially when you get towards the end of the Poppy War, shit hits the fan and it hits really, really hard, and it's kind of hard to reel back from that effectively because it's just so difficult to see some of the scenes that are involved with it. But R.F. Kuang really just, her writing is so beautiful and it fits the story so well because like there's some authors where they write fantasy but their writing style doesn't quite fit the story, and this is one of those series where R.F. Kuang's writing perfectly fits the series. It sounds exactly how it's supposed to in this kind of world. The magic is not really super involved, but there are bits of it, and I like that because not every fantasy world has to have magic, and it's kind of how I felt with the Game of Thrones, where the magic is not really there, but there's like little inklings of it, there's thoughts about it, things of that nature. And the same with the Poppy War. You see a lot more of that magic stuff in the towards the end of the Poppy War and then in the Dragon Republic a little bit here and there, but it's not a magic heavy series. It's much more focused in the political aspect and especially how the main character Rin has to traverse all of that and how she's being used as kind of a pawn in a lot of ways. And I just found it to be so amazing. And the Dragon Republic like broke me, I think, in general. It just was a book that tore me to shreds, and I'm terrified and excited for The Burning God whenever that comes out. Hopefully it's by the end of this year, but I know that there's been some delays with a lot of publishing companies because of the virus and stuff. Okay, the last series I have completed is the Thirst series by Christopher Pike. This was a series I had started and finished within high school. This is a series I think is kind of meh for me because I don't remember a lot of it, but I am going to be doing a reread of it here fairly soon, so I'll have some more constructive thoughts on the series as I go. But this was a series that I remember the last omnibus of it I had, which I think included the last 3 stories, was very strange. I don't really remember a lot about it. I think at the end of the series there was something to do with Nazi Germany and there was a spaceship involved, and somehow the main character got on that spaceship and went off somewhere and the series ended like a Fade to Black kind of thing. I don't quite remember, but that never sat well with me, and so it kind of made me really question a lot of what I had thought about the series in general at that time. So It's sitting at a meh right now, but with the reread, hopefully I will still enjoy it, because I do remember actually loving at least the very first book in the series, and then loving, I think, the third book, which involved a character that was a descendant of the main character of some sort. And I really liked those two books, so I'm kind of excited to see what my thoughts are of it now, but I have no idea what's going to happen here, like, with this reread. Am I gonna still love it? We'll see. But there you guys go. Those are all of these series I have completed as of yet, and my thoughts on them. So like I thought, the majority of them were going to be in the top 3, and it looks like the ones that are kind of towards the bottom are books I just really didn't like for whatever reason. So at the top, with Best of the Best, we have the Crank series by Ellen Hopkins, the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, the Lord of the Rings series by J.R.R. Tolkien, and the Poppy War series by R.F. Kuang. In the really good tier, we have the Beautiful Creature series by Kami Garcia and Margaret Stohl, the Divergent series by Veronica Roth, the Game of Thrones series by George R.R. Martin, the Impulse duology by Ellen Hopkins, the Kane Chronicles series by Rick Riordan, and the Morganville Vampire series by Rachel Kane. In the meh tier, we have the Dorothy Must Die series by Danielle Page, the If I Stay duology by Gail Forman, the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins, and the Thirst series by Christopher Pike. In the ugh tier, we have the Flame in the Mist duology by Renee Ahdieh, and the Fifth Wave trilogy by Rick Yancey. And in the nope tier, we have the Never Never duology by James Patterson and Candice Fox. Let me know what you guys thought of these series down in the comments below. If you agree with anything that I say, if you disagree, let me know why you think that these series are either better or worse than what I thought. I thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!